Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are now nearing the end of our third season, but we are just as excited as we were at the beginning to continue to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to the environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today for today's show on cancer on the rise, the intersection with environmental chemicals and toxic substances. And this is the last of our June series on toxic and hazardous chemicals, the effect on the environment and health. So we're very excited to take up this very important subject today. Now, since the 1970s, more than 87,000 chemicals have been approved for commercial use in our country. Yet, of those, only about 1,000 or just over 1,000, have been formally examined and graded for their hazardous and cancer-causing potential. And of those 1,000, 500 have been found worthy of being graded on a cautiously worded scale ranging from known cancer-causing to possibly cancer-causing. And in addition to these cancer-causing substances, and the term generally used is carcinogenic substances, another field has emerged, researching how environmental toxins cause endocrine or hormonal disruption. And a class of these compounds, known as endocrine disrupting chemicals, can be found in our food, in our environment, and in the products that we put on our bodies every day. And rather than being directly linked to causing cancer, like substances such as asbestos and endocrine or hormonal disrupting chemicals influence our health by mimicking or enhancing or changing our metabolic regulation. And these compounds interfere with our hormone production and our metabolism in ways that may, especially over the long term, create biological conditions that make us more susceptible to cancer and other diseases. Now, most of us are exposed to a big cocktail of environmental toxins on an ongoing daily basis, but at a relatively low level of exposure. But given the lack of regulation of chemicals and the reactionary approach rather than the proactive behavior of our regulators, it is up to us, really, to be diligent about reading labels and making healthy choices to limit our exposure to chemicals and toxins in our environment. Now, the National Institute of Health says it is ideal to adopt what they call a precautionary principle. And that is, until a chemical is found to be harmless, try not to use it. The precautionary principle means that you're maintaining awareness of what you're putting on and in your body, and you're taking steps to avoid exposing yourself unnecessarily to toxins from your household and your environment. But what about the other 86,000, give or take, chemicals that are being inhaled? Those are the ones we don't know about, that are being inhaled, swallowed, or absorbed into the skin in an unfathomable number of combinations. Again, it's a cocktail, a never-ending mixture of cocktails. How on earth do we capture data about these unseen substances and figure out if we need to be adding them to the big master list of known or possible cancer-causing agents? What about the chemicals that may not directly be carcinogenic, but may nonetheless modify our internal biology and play a role in the onset of serious diseases, including cancers? We simply cannot escape our exposure to man-made chemicals. But there is a lot we can do to moderate our exposures. As we talked about in a couple of shows earlier in the month of June, what we do know can help us. Now, some experts say a decades-old estimate that 6% of cancers, or approximately 6% of cancers, are due to environmental and occupational exposures is outdated, our scientists say, far outdated and far too low. Traces of chemicals known to cause human cancer lurk everywhere. But after decades of research, figuring out how many people might contract cancer because of them remains an elusive goal, but we continue to chase it for our own good health. Now, when you realize the extent to which we live within a chemical-laden environment, it can make you a little bit paranoid. It's likely, however, that most environmental toxins will never be conclusively tied to cancer. But the list of those that have been is growing steadily, and we don't have any reason to believe it will not continue to grow as we become more adept at tracing chemicals and studying their effects on the human body over time. Now, this is a lot. But here today to help us out are some experts from, I'm really excited because they come from a sphere of very different arenas in terms of science and medicine. And so I'm excited to have them here today to help us unpack all of this. Our guests today are first DeeAnn Epstein, MD. Dr. Epstein is a practicing physician specializing in internal medicine and sleep medicine in Lubbock, Texas. She is clinical associate professor of internal medicine at Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center. And Ann is also, I think, somewhat of an activist and certainly an advocate for environmental health. She has been chair of the Lubbock Board of Health, and she chaired the Board of Health Fracking Committee. And she has authored and co-authored several articles on the health risk of fracking. Our next guest is DeeAnn Saber. DeeAnn is a naturopathic doctor, and she practices functional medicine in Tucson, Arizona. And as a naturopathic practitioner, DeeAnn's goal is to treat the whole person. It's also aims to heal the root causes of an illness, not just stop the symptoms. And naturopathic medicine uses natural remedies to help the body heal itself. And she is definitely extremely aligned with environmental health and its effects on the body. It's like nature versus nature. And our other guest is Lydia Jall. Lydia is a science and policy associate at the Green Science Policy Institute in Berkeley, California. There, Lydia collaborates with businesses, academics, and policymakers to ensure that products are safe and effective without the use of harmful chemicals such as PFAS and flame retardants. Lydia holds a PhD in chemistry from Carnegie Mellon University. So again, we're very excited because not only are these ladies from all around the country, they're also from very different spheres of expertise that I am just so excited about to help us unpack this. So I want to start with Lydia. Lydia, can you help us out by explaining what have been or what are some of the challenges today with connecting the intersection of cancers and environmental chemicals and substances?
That's a great first question. And I think a lot of it gets back to the precautionary principle, like you mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, in the United States, most chemicals simply aren't studied before they're used. They're invented, found to have useful properties, put into production, and then are spread throughout our country. So we don't learn about their carcinogenic effects or harmful effects on the environment until they've been spread everywhere. So when frontline communities or workers start to exhibit health issues, then we start to learn about the chemicals' harmful effects. And then even later after that, once the general public has low levels in their body, then we start to learn how these chemicals affect us at low levels. So really, if we adopted a precautionary principle and studied these chemicals before putting them into use, that would improve our health and environmental health as well. I think another challenge is the issue of causation versus correlation. We often can't prove that a cancer is directly related to a specific chemical. So that makes regulation harder. It makes it harder to treat people, et cetera. And then additionally, we can't just rely on regulations like you said. Unfortunately, it is up to individuals to have to protect their own health a lot of the time. And lastly, with the work that I do a lot, just this topic is really difficult. Different people and different companies respond differently to learning that the products that they sell are actually health harming. Sometimes companies respond saying, oh no, like, please tell us more. We'd love to talk with the scientists and the medical professionals about this issue. How can we make sure that our products are safe? Obviously, that's a great response. And then other companies put a wall up and say, oh, well, it's not definitive that that chemical is harmful, or we haven't noticed any problems. And sometimes they're blatantly lying. So it really is just a difficult topic, and hopefully everyone's doing what they can to try to work towards stricter regulation, work towards encouraging the precautionary principle.
Indeed. We just have a minute before we go to break, and on the other side, we will continue this. But one brief question. Any sense of where it shakes out between those who embrace the new knowledge and those who fight about it?
I guess I'd say I'm hopeful that it is at least going in the direction of more people realizing that we need to pay more attention into what we put into our bodies, into our environment.
Well, thank you, Lydia. And again, we will continue this subject a little bit on the other side of the break. We want to go to break now and give a shout out to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, central markets, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations around the Metroplex, as well as available for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lyndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today, to our show on Cancer on the Rise, the intersection with environmental chemicals and toxic substances. And we are back with three experts from diverse areas, but also from diverse parts of the country. And so we're just really excited to have them so that they can share their experiences and their expertise with us. We are back with Dr. Ann Epstein from Lubbock, Texas, DeeAnn Saber from Tucson, Arizona, and Lydia Jaw, who's in Berkeley, California. Again, thank you all for being with us. Now, before the break, Lydia was very, I think, tactfully talking to us about some of the challenges that they exist with connecting or documenting the intersection of cancers and environmental chemicals and substances. And one of the things that I am dying to ask you as you were going through was, you mean to tell me, Lydia, that we could have a mad scientist, like we see on Batman and some of those other villain shows, Marvel, and they could make up some concoction of a chemical that is very harmful to us that they know, but perhaps doesn't bubble over and do mean and nasty things. And it could be put out there on the market?
Yes, unfortunately, because we don't have an easy established way of documenting, long-term effects of chemicals before they're allowed to be put into usage. It's very possible that harmful chemicals are put on the market. And oftentimes we associate this with the term regrettable substitution. So we put out one chemical, for example, some of the older legacy PFAS, which are highly fluorinated chemicals. Those are called PFOA and PFOS. They were known to be problematic for decades by the companies making them. And by the time the public and the Environmental Protection Agency figured that out and these chemicals were phased out of usage, the chemical industry said, oh, how about these other chemicals? The problem is these chemicals were very similar in structure and therefore very likely to have the same health and environmental impacts. But because they were allowed to put these products on the market, we then had very similar chemicals that substituted, hence the regrettable substitution of these problematic fluorinated chemicals. And then those chemicals were pervasively used throughout products. And so then we're stuck with them. And it only takes scientists, another 5 or 10 years or however long it takes to do proper research to show that those chemicals were harmful. And then maybe that second batch of chemicals gets phased out. And then you move on to a third batch of regrettable substitutions. And the process continues, right? So that's why we advocate for treating chemicals by class. If chemicals are similar enough that we can group them into a chemical family or a class, then we can regulate or try to regulate that class of chemicals altogether in order to prevent regrettable substitution.
Interesting. I just want to ask you something about that before we move on, because I can imagine as we talk about that precautionary, that I know people like DeeAnn is kind of practice that and preach that a lot every day in terms of don't use chemicals. But you said they have a class of chemicals and the classes are regulated. So that leads me to reframe the question I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you, what do we know in terms of specific chemicals or chemical reactions that are causing cancers? But I imagine from what you said, that has to be class of chemicals or what?
Yeah, sometimes. So for example, with PFAS, we know that entire class of chemicals is very persistent. And that persistence, right, that's why they're called forever chemicals. They last essentially forever. Our environment is a lot of what causes these environmental and health problems. But then also sometimes specific chemicals do react differently. It's just with these classes of chemicals, they tend to have harmful impacts in a lot of different areas as well. So sometimes you treat them as a class, but even though they can be treated as a class because of these shared issues, there can still be specific problems, right? So some harmful chemicals might contribute a lot of oxidative stress in your body, which impairs your DNA. And then other chemicals might take that oxidative stress and catalyze the formation of oxidants, which is what a lot of metals do, and increase that oxidative stress in your body, which can lead to cancer. Other chemicals might be endocrine disrupting chemicals, like you said, which tends to increase types of chemicals involved in our hormone system, like ovarian, breast, or prostate cancer. Other chemicals have been found to enhance the migration of tumor cells. So that's really one very unfortunate impact of chemicals called dioxins.
Let me ask you this, though. In your work or your opinion, what would you say are the top 3 specific chemicals or chemical groups that are most cancer-causing, or that we know are most cancer-causing?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to give you an incorrect answer. So like by statistics, I don't know which ones are the most cancer-causing, but a lot of the ones that we study as classes at our institute that I'm concerned about are PFAS, those highly fluorinated chemicals, flame retardant chemicals, and also common plastic additives like bisphenols and phthalates.
And tell our listeners where they come in contact with the last one you said.
Yeah, bisphenols and phthalates are often added to plastics to make them more malleable or have certain properties. So BPA is often found in food packaging.
Are those plastic containers we get our carry-out food in?
They might be.
Yeah.
Yeah. They could have BPA phthalates. They could have PFAS. Unfortunately, a lot of different chemicals. Phthalates are in a lot of processing equipment. For example, even if you buy organic grass-fed milk in glass containers, it will always contain phthalates because the tubing that they use to milk the cows on industrial farms always contains phthalates. So if you're someone who consumes dairy, you can't get away from phthalates unless you're literally hand milking a cow yourself, of course. But unfortunately, all of those 3 classes of chemicals that I mentioned are really pervasive in our everyday lives.
Indeed. Thank you for helping us out with that. And now, as a practicing physician and activist, which I love, what are you finding that physicians and medical researchers are seeing and finding out about cancers that are caused by environmental toxins?
Well, for this talk, I'd like to talk about cancers and due to chemicals in air pollution. What we are finding is that we're finding an increase in cancers due to air pollution. Now, air pollution itself, as well as the fine particles in air pollution, has been declared an official carcinogen. A class 1 carcinogen means they are quite confident that air pollution causes cancer. And I just wanted to go over some of this stuff with you. I mean, of course, there are many chemicals for which we do not have knowledge, but I'm very grateful to researchers who are running tremendous research programs that look at cancer in especially high air-polluted areas like Hong Kong, Beijing, China, and California, the Los Angeles area, who are giving us good quality, strong scientific data on the nature of the dangers of air pollution. The first cancer that was discovered that was linked unquestionably to air pollution was lung cancer. When you inhale small particles, those can cause cell disruptions and disrupt DNA, as Dr. Jal was telling us, and thus has clearly been linked to an increase in lung cancer, and that's why the lung cancer and the small particles were declared or classified officially as class 1 carcinogens.
Yeah, we had the American Lung Association was with us a couple of months back when they released their State of the Air report. That really is scary. We just have a couple of minutes, so I want to start with this, and we may have to roll it over to after the break, Ann. And that is to connect the dots for our listener about how air pollution causes cancer.
Well, there are a number of cancers here that can be caused by air pollution that have been discovered more recently. Breast cancer, the terribly common breast cancer, ovarian cancer, stomach, liver cancer, and in fact, all cancers have been linked to air pollution. A lot of this is recent studies done just this year. Some of this data is coming out from California starting in April, May, and June. But the mechanism appears to be similar. Of course, when you inhale a pollutant, the small particles go into your lungs. But in addition, there are additional pollutants that spread throughout the whole body. They don't just stop in the lungs. And those pollutants produce stress on the cells. They inflame the cells. And basically, they're toxic to the genes. They're toxic to DNA. And cancer requires cells that multiply. And so whenever you have multiplying cells, you're looking at DNA. And the DNA is damaged in these cells and causes them to multiply faster, and they can multiply out of control in abnormal ways and produce cancer. And that seems to be the underlying mechanism for all these multiple cancers that are clearly associated with air pollution.
Thank you so much, Ann, for explaining that so well and well laid out. We're going to go to break. We're going to come back to you, Ann, because I want to talk about that some more. We'll be right back on the other side with Dr. Ann Epstein, DeeAnn Saber, and Lydia Jal, and they're all doctors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on cancer on the rise, the intersection with environmental chemicals and toxic substances. And we are here and back with three ladies from around the country who are really making us smarter. We're back with Ann Epstein, DeeAnn Saber, and Lydia Jal. And before the break, Ann was telling us about and really laying out for us in perhaps one of the best detailed ways that's very understandable that I've ever heard about how the air pollution causes lung cancer. And I think, too, the point that certainly I want to remember to take from her explanation is that these particles are getting so tiny that it appears that they permeate the cells, and then they get in there and start doing all kind of mucky things. That causes the problem.
Well, the particles themselves, some of that is still questionable, but what is true is that air pollution contains a bunch of tiny things that do penetrate the cells, like nitrogen oxides, benzene, other toxic chemicals that have been associated with air pollution, which is quite a mix of agents, and those damaging agents do penetrate.
Well, that's what air pollution really is. The cocktail,
Yes.
if you will. Or I heard somebody call the soup that envelops us, that's all around us, that can travel all the way from the Sahara. I say that because last week here in North Texas, we had Saharan red dust, and you could see the haze out there. And I want to come back to you, though, and you mentioned that breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and some others are caused by air pollution. And in my research, I believe that I read, you helped me out, that is breast cancer the most prevalent types of cancer?
I believe lung cancer has taken over as number one. I'm not positive about that. But, a long time ago, proper ladies didn't smoke. But then as smoking became more prevalent and more evenly distributed, then lung cancer took over as number one.
Are there any emerging things that we're seeing as a result of our emergence of all of these chemicals and this chemical soup around us?
Well, one of the important things to know about these cancers is that they're not different cancers than we already have. These are the same cancers, just more of them. So when we see a cancer, it's not unique to pollution. What you'll have is when pollution causes breast cancer, it's the same type of breast cancer that people have sometimes anyway. So we're not able to say there's a new cancer or something different or strange. What we can say is there's just more breast cancer, more lung cancer, more ovarian cancer. If there's a difference between cancers caused by environmental toxins and cancers that are, say, genetic or have other causes, I am not aware yet that we know what they are. There actually may be a slight predominance of one type of breast cancer, but this is sort of totally new information.
Right.
But we do have a cancer that I didn't mention was leukemia that is showing up in fracking. Of course, air pollution is quite old, but fracking is relatively new since 2006. And fracking produces very high levels of the toxin called benzene, which is also a class 1 carcinogen, and it's known to cause leukemia. And just recently, one of our really fine researchers was able to demonstrate an increase in childhood leukemia in children who were exposed to intense fracking activity in Colorado. So that's perhaps something new on the scene in the air pollution field.
Indeed. And I want to throw kind of this question out to all of you all. And I want to start on this with DeeAnn. How do medical authorities and researchers go about determining that relationship or interconnection with the cancer that you may suspect or that you may see or that you may be working with? How do you go about determining that interrelationship with specific or any environmental toxins and chemicals?
Part of what I start with is a national environmental assessment questionnaire that I have gotten from the organization I've been studying with for these last 3 years. So I often, because of functional medicine, we're looking at the whole person. We start with blood work, some normal testing, but then if we find people aren't getting better, there's a deeper dive. I look at mold, environmental toxins. I start looking at glyphosate and heavy metals. And when I have them do this questionnaire, which doesn't cost them anything versus the testing, which does, it can help us pinpoint where really there might be some underlying issues that are really impacting the patient's health. And at this point, I've done 3 years of studying environmental medicine, and I think I need to have everybody do these tests because there's no way to get around it. We're all impacted by our food, by the air, and by the water. I was just at a conference in April, and we talked about wildfires and what's getting burned all over the West Coast in particular, right? So now anything in a home is being put into the air. And that's causing a lot of respiratory problems.
Yeah, the stuff that's in vehicles, the roots on the roof, and many, many other things as well. So thank you. I wanted to ask, too, in your area, have you had experience or know of any, I guess, known or suspected carcinogens? Like with DeeAnn in Lubbock, they've got the Barnett Shale. We have it just north of us here, too, in Dallas, where we know the fracking's going on. And we knew it wasn't good for us, but we are seeing the ramifications and able to make some of the connections. And so just have you had any experiences like that or know of anything like that in your area? What's a big bad pollutant in Arizona? Dust?
Arizona is a mining town. Copper mines are a big one. So if you go down to Bisbee, which is a little south of us, there is so many heavy metal toxins in the earth that people really are, you do not drink the water. You're not supposed to grow food in the ground. And so I find that a lot of people, I've got to check them for heavy metals. And there's a big correlation between cardiovascular problems and heavy metals. In particular, that has been studied federally, but it really impacts a person's health because metals go into your bones, they go into your organs. So they definitely contribute to cancer.
What are some of the manifestations that you see or come in contact with regarding that metal pollution is what I will call it?
Well, the hard part is it's got a lot of overlap. So you can have a headache, you can get stomach aches, you can have pain, you can get rashes, even it can show up like an allergy for some people. A lot of times people are very tired, lots of fatigue, can't think straight, brain's not clear, joint pain. So because that's such a wide variety of things, that's part of why I have them do the questionnaire so we can pinpoint closer to what is really going on. And of course, I do, from a functional point of view, very in-depth intake. So I'm asking people about their history and where have they lived and what have they smoked, ate, drank, what did they grow up around, all that stuff.
And that's interesting because you do your medical sleuthing, I'll call it, on that level. And I know Lydia is also a chemical sleuth. and so how do you do yours? When you're studying a product, say there's this cosmetic out there, how do you get tipped off, Lydia, that this is not a good thing and something that we need to research and find out about?
Yeah, I mean, luckily the chemicals that are put into cosmetics are a little bit more well studied. But I think the thing that surprised me most when I started studying this was you could take a cosmetic product from the store, whatever most common brand is there at your Target, your CVS, your Sephora, whatever. And then if you actually look up the chemicals present in that cosmetic product, you see that there is actually a lot of research on those chemicals showing harmful effects. So there's resources like the Environmental Working Group Skin Deep database. So I definitely encourage people to look up the products they use on there, and you can see that actually there are a lot of concerning chemicals used in products, and to source out the ones that have the least concerning ingredients list.
We're going to need to go to break, but on the other side, I want to delve a little bit into that. Any chemical or substance that's raised a big flag for you and your organization, and then how so, where did you see it, and where are we with it? We will be right back on the other side of the break with our guest who are really making us smarter about all of this. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Market, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, non-mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today, to our show on Cancer on the Rise, the intersection with environmental chemicals and toxic substances. Where are we now? What do we know? And we are back with three very smart ladies helping us to really understand where we are right now with the cancers and that intersection, that relationship with many of the environmental toxins and substances that are all around us every day. Pollutants, and I imagine it's just as much in the water as there is in the air. And so we want to continue this conversation, and I want to go back to DeeAnn first. Now, DeeAnn, as an integrative practitioner, though, where do you most often come into relationship with folks who have cancer caused by environmental toxins and chemicals? Do they come to you as last resort? Do they come to you with weird symptoms? Or how do you most often come into that interaction?
Thanks for that question. I usually see people after they've tried a number of other things, which is more the standard medical care, which is a trio of, chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery. And some people that makes sense, and it's been already done. And so we try to work with what's happened to that person individually. If I can have people come to us before they do those kinds of treatments, we often can give them a much longer quality of life and even put them in remission, which is a little harder sometimes when we're fighting against chemotherapeutic agents that have already been put into a person. So,
how are you able to tell that their condition is due to some environmental substances and toxins, and how you can treat them?
We usually work with Great Plains Labs. So they do environmental toxins testing that checks over 173 items. They check molds, heavy metals. They do something called an organic oats test, organic acids test, that looks at internal metabolic pathways. So we could see the load that a person's actually dealing with inside, and it's all done through a simple urine sample.
But as an integrative practitioner or naturopathic doctor, you deal with natural substances as opposed to medical prescriptions, things like that.
Well, in Arizona, we have the largest scope of practice, and I do prescribe medications if I need to. I cannot prescribe chemotherapeutic agents, which is fine with me, or opioids, but we try to do as natural as possible because we're trying to support the person's own body to heal itself, to give it the strength, to give the immune system its own support so the person's own body can fight the cancer.
Now, and I'll ask this to Ann as well, is there anything reversible or any cancers or conditions that are caused by these environmental toxins and substances reversible?
Yes, I would say yes. So if you can get the toxic load out of a person, and that includes a lot of different therapies, infrared sauna, high-dose glutathione, vitamin C IVs, so all these different things. So it's multifactorial, but we can get that load out of a person. So we test, we treat, we test again, we treat some more. So we are monitoring things along the way, and they get better. There is another treatment called the Warburg way. If you remember Otto Warburg from the 20s, there's a therapy where you lower a person's glucose levels and give them 1/10 of that tiny dose of chemo, and that chemo will follow the path of the sugar, and it can actually get rid of metastases.
And you work with medical doctors in that process?
Yes.
Yeah, because they're giving the chemicals and you're doing the other part. There's a lot to be said by trying to pair natural processes and therapies when you can to fight some of these toxins and chemicals that are out there in our nature. That's what's intriguing to me, is that the cause of the cancers in the cases we're talking about are really caused by degradation of our natural environment. And then to the degree that we can treat or help any of these with natural methods, that's just really interesting to me. I want to jump to Ann for a moment here. How do medical authorities and experts tell that the cancer or condition is connected to specific chemicals and other environmental toxins, like in the case of the Barnett Shale fracking? And I think Lydia may have mentioned this too, and I call it sleuthing, because it seems like to me that you have to go beyond tests and things like that and figure this out, given the nature of how these toxins react, how long they take sometimes to manifest, as well as the amount that's needed.
Well, it depends on the disease you're looking at. If cancer is hard because it's not that common a disease, and there are many potential causes, and a lot of it arises spontaneously out of mutation. But especially when it comes to fracking, sometimes there are diseases that are more common, like asthma, heart disease, chronic bronchitis, or emphysema. And there are plenty of cases where, say, in the Barnett Shale, for example, or in fracking in general, where a child has asthma under control, they move into a fracking area, their asthma is out of control, multiple hospitalizations, then they move away and their asthma goes away. And it correlates with high levels of toxins found in the environment. You can say, yes, that's a toxin-caused condition. Now, this often comes up in legal areas because there are people who are concerned that a irresponsible oil and gas driller is causing the problem, and they want to file suit, and it shows up in court. And then the questions are, how can you prove it? And it has been extraordinarily difficult. There was one case, not cancer, other environmental respiratory symptoms that was proven. I'm talking about one case in the Barnett Shale that was clearly proven, and the jury awarded the plaintiff over $2 million and sent shockwaves throughout the oil and gas industry. But otherwise,
how did they prove it?
Extremely difficult to prove.
How did they prove this one in?
It turned out that they were able to. The person was exposed to a sudden plume of air toxins when the plumes were released. The person was able to get immediately to the lab and get blood tests that showed high levels of the toxin in the blood that corresponded with the plume that related to the symptoms, and that was it.
Oh, my goodness.
It's been very difficult to do that, and oftentimes authorities are a little reluctant to come out and measure toxin levels in the atmosphere, famously dragging their feet until the plume is gone. So it has been very difficult. And cancer is very difficult. There were recently 2 cases of cancer finally proven in the last 2 years that were shown or were adequately proven to be related to air pollution.
Indeed. Where is that? And this was recently?
Yes, in the last 2 years.
Oh my goodness! So was
that the first 2 cases that were thought to be clearly related to air pollution?
Was that a giant leap for mankind?
Well, it has great importance when it comes to activism, when it comes to appealing to regulatory agencies or even your own city council or state legislatures, proving that the problem is due to air pollution or chemicals. That's why I have actually began to emphasize these scientific studies, because it is these scientific studies that tend to drive legislation, especially when they start out skeptical. And so those 2 cases of proven cancer due to air pollution are very important for the to add to the burden of, to add to the imperative to get legislation and regulation.
And I hate to cut you off, but we have 1 minute to go. But thank you, too. And thank you so much for being an activist with your expertise. Want to go to Lydia for a short while and then in with DeeAnn in terms of, Lydia, how can ordinary people in their everyday lives help drive solutions and protect themselves?
Yeah, so I think people can help drive solutions through their voting power, voting for people in charge who actually care about environmental pollutants. And I think also through your purchasing power, the products that are on shelves are there because of supply and demand. And if you decrease that supply because you become well educated about the safest products, then you can change the path of those products.
If we don't buy the bad things, they'll stop making them. Thank you. Last word, DeeAnn, is there anything we can do to fight, mitigate, or turn back some of the effects or otherwise protect our health and well-being in the face of these environmental toxins and chemicals?
I would reiterate what Lydia said. So eat clean, drink clean, clean your house with non-toxic stuff, check your products that you put on your body. The deeper you dive into it, the more you're going to find. You can do so much with baking soda and vinegar to clean and not poison yourself. Don't use insecticides. Quit spraying Roundup outside your house. Lots of different things that people do have the power to change.
Indeed.
Grow your own food.
And knowledge is that power. Like I said, I read in the last show we talked about what you do know can help you. And this is the case. Thank you all so very much. As always, we don't have enough time to we just barely unpack the surface of these very important topics. So we have been here today with Lydia Jall, with Dr. Ann Epstein, and DeeAnn Saber. And they have made us much smarter. We really appreciate it. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is a result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like yourselves. And each of these tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up, one way or the other, to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you for listening in, and join us again next week as we begin our July series on food production, land use, and agriculture. Thank you.